Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of ClearedCast, your security clearance careers podcast. I'm Katie, editorial comms manager with ClearanceJobs.com, and today I'm joined by Lauren Buitta, who is the CEO and founder of Girl Security. It's a great organization. I'm so happy to have y'all on the line. But in February of this year, you were actually named one of 50 women that are making the world a better place by InStyle magazine, which sounds like a huge honor, and I know that Girl Security really is. So today we're going to talk about the organization. We're going to talk about the strides that they're making for a better represented workforce within national security. It's a very important topic to ClearanceJobs.com. We're also going to talk about how we can continue that mission for the next generation of girls that are entering the field, national security, entering STEM roles. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. So let's talk about the history of Girl Security, and I'd love to know personally what your why was for starting the organization.
Yeah, I had the idea for Girl Security about 15 years ago, and really there was kind of a couple of reasons why I ultimately started it a bit later on in life. But the first of which was I went to school for political science and didn't learn a whole lot about national security, and so the kind of primary impetus was just wanting to create a space where young people could learn about what national security meant. And then my brother was deployed to Iraq. So I was working as a national security policy analyst right after college in 2002, 2003, and so forth. And so my brother was deployed. And so I had this kind of personal connection to the war. And I, like many people from a public facing perspective, felt frustrated with the war and not really understanding why we went or what was happening. And so that kind of further motivated my interest in starting Girl Security. And then, of course, the representation of women wasn't shifting, over a 10-year period that I was kind of taking note. And so I sort of combined all of those things together to create an organization that started engaging girls sooner at the high school level when they're already grounded in things like civics and history. And there's kind of a natural entry point for them to be thinking about what security means.
Sure. Well, and what a time to be starting an organization within national security alone. After the attacks, the 9/11 attacks, I know that was sort of a motivating factor for myself and getting into the field of national security, and obviously your personal ties to it with your brother. Huge motivations there. And I love that you guys are, one of the pillars is starting at a younger age. I feel like that is, or getting them comfortable and seeing folks that look like them within national security from a younger age to make them more comfortable. But sort of more of a general overarching question. Why do you think women still are underrepresented and more of a marginalized group in national security at this point?
I think some of it has to do, as you noted, with exposure. If Girl Security looks at a lot of the STEM modeling for, women's participation in the STEM field, which of course is not necessarily achieving the gains that I think most would hope for. And I think national security is even further behind because in our work, of working across the country, we're very much a grassroots organization. Girls, schools, kind of the community touch points in which they might be learning about careers, it's totally off the radar for them for the most part. So they're not talking about national security in the classroom and they're not learning about careers in national security as part of their career resources. So I certainly think just in terms of creating a pipeline, there's definitely a deficit that we're trying to fill in that space. I also think at the undergraduate level, and this is actually one of the key interventions that we implement at that early part of undergraduate. There's not a lot of opportunities for girls and women, not to say that there aren't for others, but of course that's the population we serve. And so there is kind of a lag during their college careers, if they go to college, even in community college, where they're not engaging with curriculum, they're not reading women's scholarship, which is another key intervention we're trying to implement. Oftentimes they're not learning from women scholars or professors. And so really you're kind of waiting until early career to kind of hope that girls and women find themselves into their pathways. And then at the early career level, you have a lot of impediments, cultures that may remain toxic. And certainly we hear that a lot in government and military and the IC and the private sector. So there's a culture that doesn't necessarily reflect the experiences and needs of girls and women and others. And then I think, of course, there's always the advancement issues of how do we retain girls and women who become potentially working moms or caregivers. How do we create those systems so that they can advance into leadership positions? So I think there's quite a few leaky spots along the pipeline that we can certainly all attend to.
Sure. You mentioned impediments, the exposure piece. I don't recall ever, having an internship opportunity, before graduating, that had to do with any sort of, whether it was a defense contractor or a federal agency. I was never exposed to sort of that internship opportunity even, which would have been a huge factor in where I would have landed or at what timeline in my career.
I was just going to say, and I think part of the challenge with that too is there are some, high school or have been high school directed internships in the national security space. I think part of it is branding, right? I mean, the optics tend to be historically quite male. And then you also have the idea, which we're also trying to shift, which is the definition of national security and the way it's represented. It doesn't reflect girls' and women's experiences. And I think until we adapt those models to reflect diversity, it will be a very unfulfilling feat to try to really push DEI in this space.
Sure. Well, so what sort of ways does Girls Security try to highlight more women or more diverse voices in national security?
Absolutely. I mean, our focus is really on, we always kind of say we do very little talking, and we really try to create space for girls and women's voices on security. But we have kind of three primary pillars. The first is which is in-school learning. So we work in the classroom alongside girls and teachers to kind of explore what national security means. All of that content is developed by women in national security and also features a visible mentor, a woman from the national security field. So from top to bottom, they're engaging with content and optics that represent women in this space. Our fellows program, which is kind of the next piece, where if girls participate at the high school level, they can apply to be a fellow. All of that is women-run instruction of very advanced learning like wargaming, ethical hacking, national security law, policy, intelligence analysis. So we have everything is run by women as well, and it's through their voice. It's kind of the instructors who are all wonderfully distinguished, amazing women are training through their lens in a really safe and supportive environment. And so we find that to be a really kind of appreciated and celebrated part of our program. And then the mentor network. So we have, last year we onboarded 200 mentees, so 400 people we paired together. And then this year we're on path to do about 600 girls. So that might be 1,200 pairs. So those are girls and women who are paired with a woman in the space. And so again, they're kind of getting that engagement and creating that social pipeline really soon, early in their careers so that they have that. And I think that's been, I can't say enough about our mentors who are they're literally they're fundamental to the work, but it creates a culture, I think, of support and mentoring. And then oftentimes mentees go on to become mentors. And so we're really kind of building that community of support so that they feel prepared in their careers.
Well, and you said it best, mentoring is fundamental to the national security work as a whole. So tell us a little bit more about how that program works.
Yeah, so girls and women can onboard into the mentoring network at any point up to age 26. And so once you decide that you want to commit to the mentoring program, mentors in our network spend 6 months with the mentee. And really the idea is that they provide kind of an opportunity to poke their head in and kind of see what the field is all about. But most of the time, the mentors do a heck of a lot more. They help, review resumes and draft cover letters. Oftentimes they're working with them to secure internships or even jobs. So we have now 4 years in a lot of those success stories where those relationships are really longstanding and they don't necessarily end at the 6-month period. And it's an interesting representation. We have girls who come in who almost know nothing about girl security. So they don't even know about national security. And I love that because they're able to hear from a mentor who's been in the field about what national security is. And I just think that's the best way to learn about all of the opportunities in this space.
That's very cool. And so one thing I always talk about with mentoring, you should have at least more than one mentor, but I love that you see a lot of the relationships going past the 6 months because they're almost a mentor for life or for, the life of that mentee's career, which is really exciting. And just offering perspective, especially if they're coming in with no opinion or no knowledge about national security, mentors can see their mentees grow throughout their career. Mentoring is I think it's such an important part for a woman's career, a girl entering, entry level career slots. So I love that. Yeah. Girl Security offers that.
Yeah. And I think as a lot of the young women in our organization, younger than I am, they'll kind of talk about their peer mentoring networks. And I think that's as important too, because you're not dealing with hierarchy and you can go to your friend and say like, hey, I had this experience. And I think too, having a mentoring program outside of an organization, an employer is also important because we oftentimes will hear from women, especially early on in their careers, that they're afraid to express, an issue with a higher up or whatever it may be for fear of their career being compromised, which is in and of itself problematic. But at least then they have a space that they can go to and talk to someone who may have dealt with it and say, what should I do? Or what are my options in this situation?
Absolutely. Having that safe space. So other resources that Girl Security offers women, could you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah. So in addition to our in-school programming, our fellows program, our mentor program, we run regular workshops on skills development. We had a public awareness campaign last year on disinformation. So we did a bunch of training on disinformation. This year is climate change. Mm-hmm. So we have amazing women at the intersection of national security and climate coming in and conducting a balance of informational and skills-based trainings. We also do basic professional development, like building your LinkedIn profile, resume review, security clearance, some of the kind of, big questions that girls and women have about getting into this space. And all of our programming is equity and trauma informed. That's a big part of our program. Our vision is forging equity in national security, which is more than just increasing the numbers of women in national security, but really thinking about how identity and one's lived experiences can help reshape a new understanding of national security.
Sure. So with identity, any LGBTQ plus resources that you could share with us today?
Yeah. So one of the kind of programs that we focus on in the mentor network is especially for mentees who self-identify. We always give those folks an option to say, hey, I'd actually like to be paired with a mentor who identifies as LGBTQ plus or part of that community. So that's one way in which we make it accessible, those resources accessible. The other way in which we do it is really through our programming. So every program we run starts with a conversation about identity. And that's where we kind of create that space for girls and women to come to the table and say, I identify as X, fill in the blank, and this is how my experiences shape my understanding of national security. So by having that kind of foundational discourse at the front end of our programming, that identity narrative becomes central to both our in-school learning as well as our fellowship program. So those are ways in which there's great organizations. There's one called Out in National Security, which is amazing. So we try to kind of pair up and partner and highlight some of those organizations that have a dedicated mission, building off of the way in which we talk about identity in our program.
Sure. And that collaboration and partnerships is another important piece to national security, especially in, creating this narrative that I feel like wasn't talked about very much 10 years ago, even, talking about the wage disparities or even, how women are treated in certain situations. It was very taboo. It was very hush hush. And so, creating that space where the conversations can be held. And I think different organizations sort of backing each other is another important piece of it as well.
I think it is too. Yeah. Normalizing people's lives is important, and recognizing how those experiences add value to what we're talking about and not distract from it or detract from it, I think is very important. And I think we've made some headway, but I think there's quite a bit of progress left to be made.
Absolutely. So elephant in the room and sort of where we've been over the last, how long has it been? It's certainly over a year. How had COVID-19 and the pandemic changed the way that Girls Security operated or any of the programming that you had going on?
I think to some extent, because we were a smaller organization when the pandemic, and we still remain a small organization, it didn't impact our kind of internal operations. And actually, we ended up hosting our scholars program, which actually informed what will now be the fellows program, in response to girls and women in our network saying, hey, I lost my internship. I lost, a job. I don't have anything to do over the summer. We had the idea for the scholars program. So we just decided, well, let's just do it. And so we pulled together this 6-month program, which turned out to be a wonderful experience for all of us, scholars included, but really for our team, we learned a lot. And so I think for us, it's been valuable I don't want to say the pandemic's been valuable. What's been valuable is exploring how the virtual environment can still enable mentoring. We always had e-mentoring. It was always fundamental to our program. So that didn't change that. But in terms of our reach with respect to in-school learning and the skills-based training, like the fellows program, it's really given us an opportunity to reach more communities, which was unanticipated. So I've found that there were trials, of course, being a mom with homeschooling kids and running an organization. But fortunately, I have an amazing team of women with whom I work, who we could not have grown as we have without them.
Sure. Well, and that's the beauty of where we're at today, just being able to do things remotely. And it helps you to reach more people that were probably looking for something like Girls Security, a space where they could meet other women who maybe experience similar issues. So tell us, what's next for Girls Security as we enter, not sure of timelines, but whatever this newer normal is, leaving the pandemic behind. Tell us what's next for you guys.
Yeah, I think we've really hit our stride with our programs. And, I think we'll always have a balance of different modalities. I think we'll always offer virtual learning because it does allow for access, especially in under-resourced communities where young people can't travel to a particular location. So we'll always have different modalities. With growth, we're able to now, which is something also we've always wanted to do, is offer stipends. So for all of our training programs, we're able to offer girls and women stipends as part of those training programs, which has been very well received and something we're quite proud of. We'll continue our work with the Girl Scouts. We created the first national security patch, so we're working with them to expand that programming. We're working with groups like the Naval Sea Cadets, which is great because that has been a community in which, the kind of service community is one in which we have engaged a lot from the mentee perspective, but it's terrific to kind of institutionalize those types of partnerships. And then I think we're shifting to a place where we're seeing the girls and women advance into the workforce, and there's still a lot of change to be made. So we're going to be calling for action to make sure that we retain the workforce that's entering, especially post-pandemic, when we know that not only the impacts to women in the workforce are, quite significant, but I think from our perspective, many of whom we're all national security, backgrounds or experts, we're looking at the ways in which digital threats are, gendered and racist. So thinking of kind of what additional key interventions we can have, both from an organizational level, but also from a policy level, to ensure that girls and women economically in national security can advance and can lead and become managers and decision makers as well.
Wonderful. Well, so you talked a little bit about folks that are entering your programs. They're poking their head in, they're sort of learning what national security is, but they're learning from different women and what their different lenses look like. So I'm not sure that if you'd be able to put it into words, but sort of the utopia of national security, what that workforce looks like. Like you said, we have a long way to go when it comes to lifting up women and, giving them the same sort of opportunities that other populations have had in the workforce or in this field or industry. So what is national security? What does the best workforce look like in your eyes, if you could put that into words?
Oh, I mean, I think the easiest answer is a diverse workforce, that represents the nation. But I think there's a couple of angles to it. There's the culture aspect of national security. We want women to feel comfortable expressing what their experiences may be, even if they're negative experiences. We want to see women appointed to management positions where they're tackling really complex issues. We want women's time to be valued. We want diversity of thought to be accepted. I don't imagine kind of a peaceful national security space, but I think one in which difference of opinion is actually valued, both systemically, through the institutions and policies is one key one. And I think the other aspect is viewing our national security policies through an equity lens. So decisions that we make in the name of national security, we're talking about the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan and the impact that will have on women and girls, looking at every decision we make in national security through a lens of equity. How will these issues affect women, girls, and other marginalized communities? Because those issues aren't siloed. They have cascading effects that we're actually, watching the outgrowths of. And so I think there's a couple of different ways to consider what a utopia would look like. But I think an easy one is just having a workforce that looks for more like the country is a good start. From
Excellent.
the top down, top down, bottom up.
Well, no, well said, everyone. This is Lauren. She's the CEO and founder of Girls Security, a really great organization. I encourage everyone to go check them out. You can learn more at girlsecurity.org. And for more information on diversity, equity, and inclusion and national security, you can always visit news.clearancejobs.com.